And now we look like the worst episode of Celebrity Squares ever transmitted.
Well, what do you think the quality spectrum on that is exactly?
Well, at the top end is Celebrity Squares hosted by Bob Monkhouse.
Right.
And with Willie Rushton in the centre. Your classic celeb squares, if you like.
Yeah.
And the nadir, if you like, is a nightmarish version yet to be brought to life, in which the centre square is occupied by Danny Dyer, and the host is personality. No, because that would involve him being on my telly. It's the worst thing to come out of Leeds since the M62 to Manchester.
I'm going to make this the intro.
Are you?
This is the start of the podcast, damn it.
All right, and the host is irritating personality vacuum, Holly Willoughby.
Listeners, welcome to Cinema Eclectica, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are the Geek Show's dedicated Celebrity Squares ranking.
Well, you say dedicated.
I mean, no one else is doing it.
That's true. That's true.
Yes. So we're the Geek Show's dedicated film podcast, and although I know a lot of people have been stating that a lot of television shows now are cinematic enough to qualify as films, I think it could be a while before Celebrity Squares receives that designation.
Well, you say that, but I mean, we're recording this using Zoom. Yeah. All you need is a host and 9 celebs, and let's be honest. You know, these days, the definition of celeb is vague. I reckon we could do it with just the podcast network, folks.
I mean, one of the things about doing this by Zoom is that it means that our broadcast quality is basically equivalent to Saturday night BBC One now.
Exactly. So look forward to our lockdown edition of Merlin coming later this year.
We're not just talking about old game shows that will mean nothing to our international listenership this week, though.
Hey, it was called Hollywood Squares in the US.
Oh, of course it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure there's an international version of it. It's like, who wants to be the owner of a nice second-hand Zastava in Eastern Bloc countries? hosted, incidentally, by Jeremy Clarkson.
But no, we do have films to talk about. Last week we had a director's lottery which came out with Akira Kurosawa, which turned out to be quite an opposite time to have Kurosawa come out, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because the BFI have just launched a massive new Japanese cinema retrospective on BFI Player, including a hefty chunk of Kurosawa's work. And from that, we chose Stray Dog.
I wasn't present for this.
I mean, you weren't present for it being chose, no.
No.
I use the royal we.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah.
I am only an occasional visitor to this parish.
This is true. So did you get the chance to see it or not?
I did not, unfortunately.
Ah, right, I see. Well, feel free to quiz me about minor things like who is Akira Kurosawa.
Well, I will happily quiz you, but I hate to be prompted for quizzing questions because I don't want to answer questions based on your agenda.
Right, you're an independent.
I'm going to be the Clarkson of not the Clarkson. I'm going to be the Paxman of Cinema Eclectica.
What? So you're just going to think of one question and then ask
it repeatedly until you give me the answer I want, or that the nation deserves, depending.
Well, just to start things off, I did threaten to overrule the head of Her Majesty's Prison Service, and a little bit of introduction.
But did you overrule him? Did you overrule him?
Stray Dog. Stray Dog is an interesting one because it was made in 1949, so very, very soon after the end of World War II, and it was done in a consciously American genre. It is, in effect, a buddy cop movie.
An Akira Kurosawa buddy cop movie.
It's quite a thought, isn't it? I mean, a buddy samurai movie, yes, I can stretch to imagine that. But although he was kind of a conservative guy in a lot of ways, he was certainly never politically aligned with the left in his country. He did always get a lot of stick from nationalists for being over-invested in foreign narratives and authors and styles of cinema. He adapted Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, other celebrated non-Japanese authors like this. And Stray Dog is done in very consciously American style. You'll remember that when the French finally had their blockade that was put on American cinema during World War II lifted, they were astonished by this new form of American crime movie that had proliferated in the 1940s and 50s. They christened it film noir. They started making their own versions, and from that, the French New Wave was born. But Kurosawa was doing this at the same time as the original American noirs were being made. This is a film that came out in the same year as The Third Man, for instance.
Okay.
So it's an interesting piece of parallel development, and seeing as the rules, if you will, of film noir were basically finalised in retrospect, that the genre was codified by people looking back at this and saying, what is it that makes American crime movies of this era so distinctive?
Yeah.
It's interesting how many of them Stray Dog actually ticks off, because it's a crime film set in Tokyo, and it's very much about the city in the way that noir films are often about the city they were set in.
The city is often a character.
Yeah. It begins with a voiceover establishing its time and place. It's set during a mercilessly hot summer, and it's very evocative of that. And it has that kind of... The thing that I love the most about film noirs is that their detectives are not your Agatha Christie type detectives who are confined to a very particular setting and can only explore a certain environment. A film noir detective is a wandering detective who can go all the way through society and give you a real cross-section of what the world's like at that time. And so it proves with Stray Dog. It is very much a portrait of Tokyo just a few years after the war ended. So the detective in question is a homicide cop called Murakami, played by Kurosawa's regular leading man, Toshiro Mifune. And you can tell it's Mifune because he looks and sounds absolutely nothing like any other Mifune performances. He is on a crowded, sweaty tram during this brutal heat wave, and when he gets off the other end, he finds that his gun has been pickpocketed from him. And this is the opener to a journey into the Tokyo underworld and a journey into Tokyo's illicit gun trafficking underworld. It turns out the gun has been stolen to order to use as an untraceable firearm to commit crimes with. And it also sees him partnered with an older detective called Sato, played by Takashi Shimura, who is the other half of this kind of buddy cop dynamic. Now, it's not exactly Lethal Weapon, I grant you that. the idea that there should be something kind of comic in the clash of the two detectives is only present in fits and spots, but it does do a remarkable job of creating this idea of the buddy cops as people who draw from each other's expertise and way of looking at the world and way of solving cases. Like I say, years before this is a standard action movie formula, Kurosawa was doing this.
I am finding it. I'm struggling with the idea of it being an untraceable weapon if it was a police issue.
Well, I say untraceable. Obviously, it is very traceable. It is traceable back to people who aren't involved in the crime.
True. Unless you want to frame them. Oh.
Even better, right?
You can tell I haven't seen this, can't you?
I can, yeah. So I think it's got a lot of qualities I really enjoy. The print I watched on the BFI website was kind of odd, kind of flickery, and I don't know whether that's just some damage to the negative. I don't know if there is a better version available, but I did find it kind of distracting. But as an evocation of a really ruthlessly hot summer in a big city where things are just about to blow up, it's really effective. There's a lovely scene backstage at a theatre where the two detectives are waiting to question one of the showgirls, and they watch this very elaborate dance number with dozens of dancers that they do. They all run backstage and just collapse immediately. There's like this big heap of dancing girls backstage, all of whom are completely dehydrated. It's good stuff, and Mifune is as great as he always is. I don't know what it is about Mifune, because in some ways he's quite a laconic actor, and I think his stardom was partly down to the fact that he could do this kind of minimal, cool, tough guy stuff again, really ahead of its time, really inventing what an action hero would become in the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So on one level, he's got that, but when he goes big, he's not afraid to go big. Towards the end, he is wounded in his hunt for the criminals who took his gun. And there's a real kind of physical pain that is palpable in his performance. It's not like, modern action heroes where they get shot, they wince a bit, pour a bit of whiskey on the wound, and then they're running around like nothing happens. When Mifune is hurt, for all he's tough, he wants you to know he's hurt.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, partly because I just read David Thompson's piece in Sight and Sound, where he asks whether the minimalism of modern acting is something to do with the helplessness we all feel politically. I think that's, we've all gone mad during lockdown, and it's nice that some of us can get our mad ramblings into a 5-page feature for Sight and Sound. Good on you. But I do sort of understand what he means. It's been a while since I saw someone really have the confidence to go theatrical as much as Mifune does here. And it's not theatrical in a kind of inverted commas way. I mean, I guess Willem Dafoe's performance in The Lighthouse is quite theatrical, but he gets away with it because it's a genre film and it's set in a kind of weird version of the past.
Right.
So, it makes some sort of sense there. But this isn't a horror film. It isn't a film set in the past. It's a film that's going for absolute gritty, here and now realism. And somehow it can accommodate this really sometimes very big performance, which I think you can only really put down to Mifune's genius. I don't think there's anything clever I can say about it. It works because he's really good.
I'm intrigued by the cast.
Yeah.
Yeah. As someone who's not seen the film, I am drawn to the fact that Noriko Honma plays wooden tub shop woman.
Yeah. Famously huge centre of the Japanese criminal underworld, the illicit wooden tub trade.
Right. And Minoru Chiaki as girly show director.
Now, I mean, you may have picked up that there are showgirls in this movie,
Yep.
and you may have thought, that must be what this girly show is. But no, in fact, the terrible 1990s BBC Two magazine show, The Girly Show with Sarah Cox, does actually feature in this movie. Another way in which Kurosawa was very ahead of his time.
And the hosts of The Girly Show go uncredited in their cameo performances.
It's a shit business, isn't it?
Oh dear.
So I really liked it. I have here a copy of Akira Kurosawa's autobiography, which is called Something Like an Autobiography. Selling himself a bit short there.
Yeah.
I would say it's very like an autobiography. If he'd written a book of 17th century madrigal sheet music, for example, that would be not much like an autobiography.
Do you think he was just playing a joke at the hands of librarians?
Yes, maybe.
Maybe he was savaged by one as a child.
He talks about shooting a film as a remarkably relaxed, happy time. He also talks about it as a time when one of the sets was blown away by a typhoon. So you think, if that's you filmmaking in sort of laid back, relaxed mode.
Yeah, I don't want to be with him when he's thrill seeking.
God, yeah. I mean, Herzog would blanch at that. But he's a lot of fun. He's an endearingly grumpy guy. And I think in terms of his attitude towards filmmaking, there is a passage that I would love to read here, which I think says it all. He talks about a scene that he filmed for, which one was it? Sugata Sanshiro, one of his very early films, where he overdubbed a sound effect on a lotus flower opening, which is, of course, not realistic. You know, they don't make that much of a sound.
No. Very quiet, your lotus flower.
Yeah. Pretty, keep themselves to themselves.
Yeah.
Which he defends himself by saying, it's a matter of aesthetics, not physics. There is a famous haiku by Basho, an old pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of the water. There are those who read it and say, well, of course, if a frog jumps into the water, there's going to be a noise, but they simply have no feeling for haiku. Likewise, people who say that it's strange for Sanshiro to hear a beautiful sound when the lotus flowers open have no feeling for movies. There are sometimes such human beings among film critics. The things they see are so far off the beam that you would think they were possessed by some kind of demon. I suppose nothing can be done about critics, but we can't have such people among film directors. So that's from Akira Kurosawa owns Cinema Sins with Facts and Logic, published in 1980. Top guy. Recommendations-wise, I had this wonderful moment of smugness when I was watching it, and I thought, this is a bit like The Naked City. You know, was there a TV series spin-off of The Naked City? I think there might have been.
There might have been.
But I was thinking about the Jules Dassin film with that sort of classic opening voiceover. There are 8 million stories in The Naked City. Here is just one of them. And again, that has that very kind of urban anthropological approach to film noir. And then I was reading up about Stray Dog, and guess which American film noir Kurosawa cited as a particular inspiration?
Was it Naked City?
It was The Naked City.
Wow.
So I was delighted by that. I think that's the first time we've ever done a recommendation that is that, I don't want to say insightful because it sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but I am, because I was right.
Do you want a second moment of smugness?
Yes.
There was a spin-off TV series.
Yes. So that was great. I was more than happy with that. There's, I've got to say, one of the devices that Kurosawa uses to convey this sense of intense summer heat is he shows there's a kind of gauze that makes up the canopy on some shops that Murakami walks through. And it's one of these big wordless sequences that this film has quite a lot of, despite the opening voiceover, despite film noir being traditionally a pretty chatty genre. There are long stretches of what certain critics call pure cinema, where it's just people moving through an environment and observing it, and it's wordless and it's really impressive. And one of them shows through these kind of net canopy roofs the sun. And it is often stated, although I don't know how anyone would go about proving this, that Kurosawa was the first director to simply point the camera at the sun, which I know it's so strange to me, because it seems like such a natural thing to do. You can't look at it. You might as well film it.
Yeah.
But that was one of his signature shots that he left to posterity.
Wow.
So should have a bit generalised Kurosawa chat. What's your experience with him being like?
I'm going to have to go look at the list now, because I'm not entirely sure that I know that much of it. Let me see. I'm gonna go mainstream here, and it's probably Seven Samurai.
Well, I mean, you say that's mainstream, but it's kind of impressive because it's about 3 hours 10 minutes, isn't it? Seven Samurai.
I said I was familiar with it. I didn't say I'd actually watched it.
Fair enough. I've never watched Seven Samurai, and one of the reasons why I was glad when this came up is that I'm just not as familiar with Kurosawa as I really should be, particularly the kind of urban, modern-day kind of social realist stuff that Stray Dog is one of the most popular examples of. I know some of the samurai stuff. I certainly know the Shakespeare stuff, and if it was Ran, his version of King Lear, I could talk about that forever, because I think Ran is the only Shakespeare adaptation that I think actually improves on the Shakespeare play it's based on.
Oh, high praise indeed.
Indeed. And it's Lear. So if I was saying that about an adaptation of Troilus and Cressida, the bar would be set significantly lower. Indeed, I advise any director who wants to become the second director to improve on a Shakespeare play, just do a version of King John. It'll be really easy. But Lear is obviously one of Shakespeare's crown jewels, and the fact that Ran is significantly better plotted, particularly in how it handles the Duke of Gloucester subplot, is just sensational. It's such a great film. Cool. But of course, that was one of the things that he got in slight trouble from Japan's then not insignificant nationalist fringe for doing Shakespeare and Dashiell Hammett in Yojimbo, Dostoevsky in The Idiot. I saw his film The Hidden Fortress too. Shocking rip-off of Star Wars, that is. George Lucas should sue.
Hi there, I'm Robert Rankin, and you're listening to The Geek Show. Oh yes.
So if you enjoy what we do, there are several very simple ways that you can help us out doing it. For a start, you could go onto your podcast provider of choice and give us a rating and a review. That helps more than you'd think. Or if you fancy something a bit fancier, you can donate to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. We are planning new things to put on that Patreon as rewards for backers, so keep an eye on that. We are on Facebook, just search for The Geek Show, and you can find us on Twitter at TGS_The Geek Show.
Unsure if your Spider-Man is amazing or spectacular? Infinitely confused by Crisis on Infinite Earths? Or does the mere thought of X-Men continuity make you tremble? Then 4Panel is the podcast for you. Join me, Andrew, and my co-host Robin Mick as we guide you through the weird and wild world of comics. We'll talk about the secret origins of your favourite characters, delve into the craziest events of comics past, and review the hottest new graphic novels that you might have missed. That's 4Panel, a part of the Geek Show Podcast Network, available wherever podcasts are found.
So yeah, if you go over to our website, we've not got anything up at the moment, but hopefully by the time this goes out, there should be a few more things on. I know Aidan is working on a review of the new second run title, Distant Journey, which is a Czech film. Do you know what the Czech for distant is, Mick?
Oh, yes. I think I do.
Yeah?
Yeah. Is it Dalek?
Daleka, yes.
Daleka. Yeah.
Thought you would appreciate that.
Yeah. Someone really ought to name a race of aliens after that.
I suppose they're from a bit of a way out, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's not their number one characteristic, but I guess the BBC just wouldn't spring for a race named after the Czech for bastard.
No, true.
But yes, we've got that. We've also got Matt Cunliffe's review of a new title from Studio Canal, the Bolting Brothers' The Family Way, of which...
Dun, dun, dun!
How smooth was that?
It nearly caught me unawares. I'll be honest, it was that smooth.
I was expecting to like sip from that can, just do a big sip for it. That's what this podcast has lacked over the years.
What, comedy drink spurts?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, The Family Way, 1966 comedy drama film. And it's a bit odd.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a good fish, but it's an odd fish.
Right.
Because it's basically a kitchen sink tale.
Mm.
It's set in an unspecified area of the north of England. Let's call it Northtown.
Northistan.
Which is just across the hill from T'othertown. And it's that very sort of generic world that, you know, Rita Tushingham and Albert Finney lived in during the 60s. Now, normally those kitchen sink films fall into one of two very definite categories. There's either the sort of farcical comedy, or there's the harrowing drama.
Yeah.
It's very rare that they're conjoined. So we start off with Howell Bennett and Hayley Mills tying the knot, newlyweds, and we get off to their wedding reception, and much drinking goes on. And while they're celebrating their nuptials with their family and friends, the boisterous boss of Howell Bennett's character nips upstairs and loosens the bed. So that when they have their wedding night, hilarity will ensue. So Arthur and Jenny, for it is they who are wed, eventually go upstairs. Now the thing is, this has got the kind of cast that this kind of British film could usually only dream of having in one thing at this time. So you've got Hayley Mills as Jenny Piper. You've got Howell Bennett as Arthur Fitton, shot in the same year that he was a butterfly in Doctor Who. I mean, what kind of an eclectic career mix is that?
I really pity non-Doctor Who fans who have tuned in this week. It's okay, guys. It gets better.
Which is what Doctor Who fans said in the 80s. So they're having their reception. It ends up back at the house. Van der Valk, Barry Foster,
right,
plays Arthur's boss, who loosens the bedposts as a merry jape, and Arthur's dad, Ezra, played by John Mills. And do you remember a Blackadder episode where they discuss the bluest thing ever, and it turns out to be the Blue Stone of Galveston?
Yes.
Right. Whoever wrote that script has never looked at John Mills's eyes. I mean, honestly, they are hypnotically blue in this.
Right.
And there are other characters that have got blue eyes in the film, but just you find yourself focusing. It's the reverse of art. You follow them around the room. It's bizarre. But he leads the drunken singing, and there's a clash. There's quite clearly a clash between Arthur and Ezra. There's another son, Jeff, played by Murray Head, who's a sort of typical northern working class son. He goes to speedway trials on his bike. He drives to work on his bike. He's always messing with some kind of engine part or something. Or he's out drinking with his mates, going to the dance, pulling girls, etc. Whereas Arthur's more of a bookworm. And gets sage advice from his dad Ezra, who works at Gasworks and always has done.
Can I just chip in that I am giggling at the idea of him being called Ezra? It's such a hipster name. Skinny jeans John Mills here.
Well, actually, if you take out, let's be fair, it's written as Ezra brackets John Mills. If you take out the John,
it's very close, isn't it? Yeah.
So he gets such sage advice from Ezra as, if you read too many books, your brain will overeat. So there's this. He listens to classical music. He enjoys reading, and there's an intimation, and this is what the film does very cleverly around a lot of things. It hints at things, but never outright states them. And the thing is, a lot of the environment, there's some assumptions made in this working class household about how things will happen. So, and I remember hearing family members talk about this kind of rite of passage during a newlywed's early weeks and months. So they've prepared, instead of a bridal suite, they've got the spare room has been set aside as the newlyweds room. And it is expected that until they're on their feet and they've got a place of their own, they will stay there.
Right.
And I know for a fact that my mum, with her first husband, had been in that situation where they stayed in her home until such time as they were able to leave.
Okay.
So it's a real situation. there's also the way that people pussyfoot around situations as well. So there are hints done through glances and hushed conversations that maybe Ezra isn't biologically Arthur's dad. There's also a hint, but it's never outwardly stated, that maybe Ezra had a bit of a broke-back relationship with his best mate, Billy, back in the day, who actually might be Arthur's dad, because Billy went on the honeymoon with Ezra and his wife.
They were a throuple. Are you sure John Mills isn't playing a hipster?
Now, they had separate rooms on honeymoon in Blackpool, right? But at 7 o'clock every morning, Ezra and Billy went down and walked along the beach together. Just chatting and that.
As one does on one's honeymoon.
Yeah. So there's all these little sort of implications of a wider story. But like I say, nothing gets stated outright. And that's what gives you your drama. In between times, you've got all these farcical things like they've paid a fortune for their honeymoon to a guy in what appears to be a pop-up travel agent. And when they turn up for their coach, along with about 56 other people, there's just a big pile of luggage and no coach because the pop-up travel guy has surprisingly done a Rona. But it somehow manages to tie that into the disaster that is their wedding night. Yeah. Because when they do go upstairs and they do have their first night of passion, as it were, the bed does collapse. And instead of what they should be getting up to, they end up having a row because she gets an uncontrollable fit of the giggles and he just gets mad because he feels like, she's as bad as everybody else that's laughed at him all his life and stuff.
Yeah.
So what you then get is this troubled tale of them going several weeks without consummating the marriage. And in what, for 1966, has got to be a fairly ahead of its time piece of plotting, they seek marriage guidance. They have discussions she has discussions with parents. There's a threat from Arthur's boss that he'll show Jenny what should be happening on a wedding night.
Blimey.
And so there's the whole rumour mill going round and things escalate and escalate. But I've got a theory as to why it didn't happen.
Right.
And it's because of one scene. Now, Jeff, the brother played by Murray Head, comes home one night to find Jenny Piper in the bath, in the back kitchen, because that's where you have your bath.
As one does.
In Northern Town. She stands up in shock and is naked. And I believe this is Hayley Mills' first sort of
I was going to say this will be
adult role.
Yeah, pretty soon after Child Star stage end.
Yeah, so she's probably about 1920 in this. And the thing is, she's got a similar figure to Britt Eklund in The Wicker Man.
Right.
Okay. But you don't find her sexy because it's Hayley Mills.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's that view of a character that, Britt Eklund was always the sex kitten. So,
it's forever too soon with Hayley Mills.
Yeah, that's it. So maybe that's what Arthur's problem was. But you're Hayley Mills. Also, your dad's downstairs. The disappointing thing about it is the ultimate resolution of their personal issue, which comes out of a mild but nonetheless domestic violence episode.
Yeah.
So a disappointing resolution, but it does get resolved. It's an interesting character piece. I mean, there are very few people in it who don't have a massive depth of secret stories or rumours to them that all come out during the conversation and stuff. Windsor Davis is unnamed in a cameo role.
Wow.
Kathy Staff is uncredited in a cameo role. Honestly, the outside the main characters, even just the nosy neighbours that put their two penn'orth over the fence.
Yeah.
Household names from sort of the heyday of 60s and 70s sitcoms. Diana Coupland's in there, who was the wife in Bless This House.
Right.
And they're just dotted about, and you think, this could be a picture round on Pointless. Name this 60s film star. So, it's never... The comedy is lightweight, and it's fairly obvious farcical stuff. But the character studies of the family and the ritual of everything is phenomenal. Again, it's a 60s kitchen sink film. There's nothing stunning about the cinematography. The landscape of the mills and the moors around Bolton, which is where it was filmed, is used effectively to say, look, we're up north. Look out, you can tell we're up north. It's grim look. So, but yeah, it's a great film. It's comedy drama. It's the wrong genre for it. It's the wrong description. It's a drama.
Yeah.
Through and through. But there's no bad performances in it.
Yeah.
Interesting extras on the Studio Canal release. There's the original Armchair Theatre production, which just focuses on the wedding night and not the run-on afterwards. And that features Albert Tatlock from Coronation Street. And again, it's difficult to believe that in 1961 an armchair theatre drama would deal with the inability of a married couple to consummate.
Well, that was part of those one-off plays brief, wasn't it? They were commissioned to give young writers, directors and actors a chance, and also blow the state foundations of this so-called society asunder. It was a weird pitch, but it got made.
Yeah. And this was, and the Armchair Theatre presentation is from 5 years prior. Interestingly, it's a telecine capture of an armchair theatre, but not in a sort of telesnaps type way. But back to Doctor Who again. So it's actually just a recording of something off the telly, literally, rather than the actual film.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's in many ways it's a tighter story because it's only an hour long. But it is interesting to see how deep the stories for some of the characters went, because you don't investigate the relationship between Arthur and his father, other than it's a slightly strained father-son relationship.
Yeah.
There's certainly none of the background about Billy and his walks along the beach and stuff like that. So, also, interestingly, arm wrestling. I don't know whether there are rights issues about using the word arm wrestling, but it's called the elbow game in this.
Maybe it's cross promotion. Maybe ITV are trying to launch that as their big new Saturday night game show.
Oh well, it's a bit early. I mean, maybe they were still sort of in the very early stages of commissioning Indoor Sports League, and just in case that was going to spin out into something. But yeah, it was the elbow game, because they clear a table.
Yeah.
And Ezra challenges someone to the elbow game. I thought, what the bloody hell's the elbow game? I've never heard of it. And I was looking forward to this Sporties but all their arm wrestling. So, but yeah, great film. It's well paced. I mean, it's quite long for its time. It's just short of 2 hours.
Right.
That's the other thing that was disappointing.
Oh.
The score.
Right, because it's by this Scouse fella, isn't it?
It is. It's by one half of the Lennon-McCartney duo.
Yeah.
And it's produced by George Martin and arranged by George Martin.
What could go wrong?
Oh, the execution, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not remarkable. I mean, my previous experience of Murray Head as a performer is One Night in Bangkok from the musical Chess, which was a hit single back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I think he turns up as part of a band who quite badly perform one of these tunes that have been composed. And other than that, it's a quite unremarkable score. There's some elbowing in of Beethoven's Fifth as part of the fact that Arthur enjoys listening to classical music.
Yeah.
But the rest of the score, it's unremarkable. And they make such a big thing of the fact that it's Paul McCartney and George Martin in the credits and everything. Yeah. No, there were other songs that used contemporary music better. Other films that used contemporary music better.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was disappointing. The other thing that I found remarkable about this film was the opening credits.
Oh.
Because they go on for a good 15 minutes. They start in the first shot, and at first it looks like everyone who's in the film is going to get their own little bit of text. Because every time a new character appears on screen, their name or the name of the actor appears.
Yeah.
Is this going to go on throughout the entire film, so that, like, you know, if they're walking down the high street, there's just like a cloud of words going,
yes,
Bob Collins. Bob Collins, Max Smith, Peter Public. But yeah, it's about 11 minutes before you actually get the Family Way title card.
That's very odd.
Yeah. So, but yeah, good film.
I like the Balsing brothers. I think it's very strange that they are not as celebrated these days as they should be. When you think they made this, they made I'm All Right, Jack, Twisted Nerve, Thunder Rock, 7 Days to Noon, Brighton Rock.
Yeah.
It's not bad CV, is it?
It's not, no. And you know, this is a perfectly adequate film.
Yeah.
I would have said, even within the genre of kitchen sink dramas of the 60s, it stands out from having such a layered sort of plot line and character development. But beyond that, it's not cinematically notable. It's not. The score is not to die for. It's certainly true. There's nothing remarkable about it, but there are some standout performances. It's probably the one where you can't poke a hole in anyone's performance at all. But that's one of the things that kind of, because all the performances are so good, it kind of makes it less remarkable.
Oh yeah, I guess.
Do you know what I mean? So yeah. So, but yeah, it's worth a watch.
So a very different era of British cinema is what I've got to look at here, because Curzon Home Cinema, which has been doing such a great job releasing not just older films, but also new films that were scheduled to come out in cinemas before the cinemas closed, releasing those online.
Oh, I remember cinemas.
They were good, weren't they? Cinemas, what were they all about?
I don't know.
A sort of nostalgia comedy about cinemas. Remember cinemas where you used to go and see the films, eh?
But you tell the young ones of today that.
Yeah, they have recently put up a selection of Merchant Ivory restorations, which was supposed to come out in cinemas, but obviously now are on their website. They recently added Heat and Dust, starring Julie Christie, which has a fantastic anecdote about it, which goes to show how very, very different Merchant Ivory were from the standard Hollywood filmmaking apparatus. That when Ruth Poirot Jahabla sent her script for it to one American studio, it came back with a note beginning, "We have read your script, eat my dust." But it's kind of interesting for me to go back to Merchant Ivory, because when I was getting into films in the 90s, they were very much on the slide. It wouldn't be unfair to say dominated British cinema for a lot of the 80s. And by about the mid-90s, when they were making stuff like Jefferson in Paris and Surviving Picasso, it was clear that a bit of the shine had gone off. They weren't turning in A-star stuff anymore. They had done that thing that British people keep doing, of becoming too successful and having to be brought back down.
Yeah. Success. What right do you have to have success?
Well, none whatsoever, which is why I think the government are doing such a great job. But I did not like Merchant Ivory when I was young, and I'd love to say it was a very informed, scholarly dislike, but it wasn't. It was because they made the kind of films that your English teacher thought you should go and see.
Yeah.
And compared to some of the delights that British and American cinema were offering by then, your Danny Boyles, your Quentin Tarantinos, your Coen brothers, it did seem very fusty and old hat to someone who was a teenager at that time. But over the years, I've started to wonder whether maybe it isn't time to reconsider them. And of course, Ismail Merchant passed away a few years back, but James Ivory, the other half of the partnership, is still going, and a couple of years ago won an Oscar for his script to Luca Guadagnino's Call Me By Your Name. And the interesting thing about Call Me By Your Name is that when I watched it, I liked it a lot. I like Guadagnino a lot. I'll have an active punch-up with someone who doesn't like his Suspiria remake any day.
And tickets to that punch-up will be available exclusively through the Geek Show.
It's one of our Patreon rewards. I will play the elbow game with anyone. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I couldn't quite deny that it was a Merchant Ivory film. It is a film about very rarefied love blossoming between a bunch of Anglo-American classic scholars living this ridiculously well-off life in a beautiful part of Italy. You know, it's not like they'd won me back over by suddenly becoming a bit more like Takashi Miike or something. They'd made a canonical Merchant Ivory film that I liked. So I went back to Maurice, which is mainly famous now as one of the first roles of Hugh Grant. This is 1987. This is, many years before his breakthrough with Four Weddings and a Funeral. and he's very much in the kind of young character actor mode that he fulfilled for all of those Ken Russell films that he was in.
Actually, I've just noticed on the cast list, we should make this our Barry Foster episode.
Oh, of course, Barry Foster's in this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll call it the Van der Valk episode and jump on that bandwagon.
Yes. Mark Warren, this is your future. And it's got a fantastic cast too. I mean, it's got some people like Denham Elliott and Billy Whitelaw, who were established stars at the time it was made. It's got some people like Rupert Graves and Simon Callow, who were just coming up when it was made. And it's got some stars of tomorrow, like Hugh Grant and Helena Bonham Carter, who has her first role in a film in the incredibly challenging part of Woman at Cricket Match.
Oh.
Her signature part in a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does Johnny Depp play? Oh, no, sorry.
So it's got a lot going for it cast-wise. The most common criticism of it is James Wilby as the title character, who's often cited as kind of bland and non-demonstrative when he's up against these more attention-grabbing star names. I don't think that's necessarily a killer. I mean, Maurice is based on a novel by E.M. Forster. A lot of Merchant Ivory's films were based on novels. A lot of them were based on novels by E.M. Forster in particular. But Maurice is kind of an odd sort of a novel. It went unpublished in E.M. Forster's life. He wrote it, he completed it in 1914, and he decided that because of its homosexual theme, it would go unpublished during his lifetime, as he just didn't want that kind of fuss. And then, fortunately for him, but unfortunately for his fans, E.M. Forster went on to live to the age of 90. So this thing that he wrote as a young man ended up being published in the 1970s. And you would think that a lost novel by a titan of English literature like that would be immediately fallen upon with gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Not really. Nowadays, I think people are more likely to cite Maurice as one of Forster's, maybe not one of his great novels, but very good, very rewarding novel. At the time, there seemed to be this consensus that, it's lesser work, it's not that great. And I don't know if people were just embarrassed by the subject matter by then, or whether they wanted a more dignified excuse for his refusal to publish it. But it seemed to get more flack than it was worth. I don't think it's a dreadful novel by any means, but it is very much a product of that sort of Christopher Isherwood, Radcliffe Hall era of queer literature, where the protagonist is kind of a viewpoint character and a bit of a suffering saint, it has to be said, who goes through the ringer, loves and loses without demonstrating that much personality of his own. And I think it's Wilby's misfortune that he plays that very well. That is kind of his problem here.
So he's too good at the job.
Yeah. But you look at the context in which it was made as a film, and it's not that dissimilar from the context in which Forster wrote it. I mean, there had always been that tradition of libertinism and bohemianism and free thinking among the aristocracy. But as you go down the social pecking order, things that are fine for the upper crust become moral panics. And that was very much the case when Merchant Ivory made this in 1987. The AIDS crisis was in full swing. Section 28 was being debated. The Times, because it's always the Times who come at you with this stuff, said that it was irresponsible of Merchant Ivory to make a film about homosexuality with AIDS around. Jesus Christ. Never let it be said that the Times do anything more substantial than just give a posher, more eloquent voice to the absolute worst of right-wing opinion. So I suppose this is part of why I find it a bit easier to appreciate Merchant Ivory now, because for all of their glossiness and for all that their films are very slow and stately and very, very upper class, they were getting films about gay love and post-colonialism into the multiplexes at the height of the Thatcher era, and they were getting nice, church lady conservatives to go and see them and enjoy them. And looking back, that is kind of amazing.
It is.
So I can cut them a bit more slack on that. In terms of the actual filmmaking, I think one thing that made me enjoy Call Me By Your Name more than the films that Ivory himself directed is that Luca Guadagnino is a very sensual kind of director. If Luca Guadagnino wants you to know that a character in his films is sexually attracted to another character, by God, he goes all out. And I think in Merchant Ivory's films, there is that element of sensual pleasure that is kind of missing. I mean, I'm not just talking about that in a sexual sense, although it is a part of it. But when I've been recently, during lockdown, watching for the first time and greatly enjoying the films that Joseph Losey made in Britain with Harold Pinter, The Servant, The Go-Between, Accident, which no one ever talks about, but which is amazing. I love Accident. And I think, again, one of their pleasures is when you watch film like Accident, I know that I'm going into this world of Oxford Dons that has nothing to do with my everyday life. But when I see how Losey captures sunlight, when I see how Losey captures the grass on an early summer's morning, when I look at how Losey captures the water swirling around the punt, I feel like I'm there. And I think it's that investment in the details that really draws you in, despite whatever kind of class warfare-based misgivings you may have for this stuff. And I appreciate that. And I think as a director, there are a few bits where James Ivory goes for it, but mostly he's the kind of director who just wants the camera to be looking at the person who's talking, with them in the centre of the frame. And when someone else talks, it cuts to someone else in the centre of the frame. It's, I suppose I can see that if you're a fan of his direction, you might say this is beautifully simple and unaffected and unpretentious, but to me it just looked a bit meat and potatoes. So it's got that, but the performances, which were always a huge part of Merchant Ivory's appeal. I mean, there's a reason why they were Oscar stalwarts back in their day. The performances are very strong. It's easy to see why Grant went on to be a big star after this. There is a lovely small performance from Ben Kingsley as an American therapist who Maurice goes to kind of cope with the aftermath of his unhappy love affair with Grant's character. It's no spoiler to say it's unhappy, by the way. It starts going wrong pretty much straight away and only becomes angstier as the film goes on. That's very good, and I do think it gets the kind of social detail of this kind of upper-class gay bubble coming up against the reality of a world where gay people were persecuted very well. It also has this balmy opening with Simon Callow, who I adore, but who is not the most understated of actors. And I think if you're looking to gently ease your audience into another time and another place, there are gentler ways to do it than having Simon Callow play a teacher who gives the young Maurice a bit of friendly advice about the birds and the bees, which includes him drawing anatomically detailed diagrams in the sand with a stick, while bellowing about what he calls the membrum vitae and what he inexplicably pronounces the vagina. the what?
I think that isn't that the national bird of Mexico?
I think it's meant to be funny. I think it's a very odd choice to open your sensitive romantic drama with the comic relief. But it is what it is, and what it is something I can't really describe. And I think that brings you back to the other reason why, like, 1987 was a risky time to release something like this, because forget the political landscape, forget the endemic homophobia. 1987 is also the year With Neil and I was released. And God help me, even in Call Me By Your Name, a film I like a lot, but every time James Ivory writes a gay character, it always comes out as Uncle Monty. There is a bit at the start of Call Me By Your Name when Armie Hammer, an actor who physically could not be further from the late Richard Griffiths.
True.
But when Armie Hammer is going around talking about fresh apricots and talking about the etymology of the apricot, the fact that it comes from the Greek apricox, and you just think he is going to start talking about there being a mystery to a firm young carrot any second, isn't it? So I had mixed feelings. I greatly admire the craft. I admire the bravery of doing this in this era and getting it in front of a fairly mainstream, middle of the road audience. It's still not entirely my thing, but I will sit through a very long film for just one of those moments that reminds you that when you give them transformative parts, people like Ben Kingsley and Hugh Grant can be absolutely chameleonic actors. You know, they absolutely have that, even as their screen persona has become kind of set in stone by success. Mm-hmm. But what talents they are. And that's Maurice, which is out now on Curzon Home Cinema. I think that was good. I got through that without making a single joke about the Joker by the Steve Miller Band.
You did?
Because some people call that film Maurice.
Do they? Woo. And they just went and spoiled yourself.
Yes.
You were doing so well, Graham.
In so many ways, yeah.
Now, just sit in a corner, as per the government guidelines, and think about what you've done.
Yeah, all that time I was sat in the corner at school with a Dunces cap on was actually social distancing before its time.
That was preparation.
So yes, that's Cinema Eclectica for this week. Next week we're doing another special. We noticed that next week was going to be the week that Disney's adaptation of Artemis Fowl came out, and I know nothing about Artemis Fowl because I think I was in my 20s when it became a thing. But I noticed that a lot of people on the internet were being angry about it, which it's not like the internet, is it?
No, it's usually such a calm and measured place for response.
Yeah. So we decided to use that as a jumping off point to do something that I've been wanting to do for ages, our Bad Adaptations special.
Bad Adaptations, I see what you've done there.
You see why I was so keen on this, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's worth the price of admission just for a title like that.
It better be, because we don't have any other ideas. No, Bad Adaptations will be a Cinema Eclectic special where we look at the most misfiring page-to-screen adaptations in the history of cinema. And that's coming out next week. But until then, that's been your lot from Eclectica. I've been Graham.
And I've been Mick.
See you next week.
Goodbye now.